Now, according to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, Nigeria has about 10.5 million out-of-school children, the highest number in the world. The country also has a staggering 71% of the population living on less than $1 a day. Now, our guest today, Orondaam, the founder of Slum2school, walked away from an opportunity to become a doctor and a well-paid job as a banker to provide education and health services to disadvantaged children. It's a joy having you, Otto. Welcome to RTV News.
Thank you very much, Isabella. It's a pleasure to be here in your studios.
All right, now, oh my goodness, we've always talked about the Africa that we want, the Africa where Africans are solving African problems, and I think you are the symbol of just that. I want to start by saying congratulations on achieving something incredible.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, now in an interview with Forbes Africa, you actually said, and I quote, that there was a documentary that you watched earlier on BBC called Welcome to Lagos, and it actually depicted Africa in a very negative way, which you said it hurt you so much and made you ask yourself why, and I'm paraphrasing here, why the BBC would do a documentary showcasing Lagos, and the only place that they found appropriate was a slum known as Makoko. Why did this bother you so much? And if you could also share with us how that influenced you.
Thank you so much. So that's a very interesting question, because this is the first time I'm being asked that question in a very long time. So I think it was in 2010 or 11 when I saw this video called Welcome to Lagos. For context, I'm Nigerian, and I live in Lagos, which is one of the most populous cities in the world. It's filled with incredible young people, incredible people doing great job. It's the center of tech on the continent of Africa, and it's filled with just lots of incredible success stories. But then I saw this video called Welcome to Lagos, shot by the BBC. That's the British Broadcasting Corporation. And it depicted Lagos in a very, very bad light. So what the focus was showing the slums, showing underserved communities across Lagos State, and there were about 4 different episodes. And that got me thinking, why would a documentary be called Welcome to Lagos? And these were the places that the BBC felt was appropriate to showcase Lagos State. And I watched those documentaries. It inspired me because I felt it was important that as Africans, we should start telling our own stories.
Yes.
As Africans, it's important that we also control the narrative. New York is no different from Lagos State, but you never see the BBC shoot a documentary on New York and say, welcome to New York, and they're showing you the rats in New York, which we all know is that's a huge challenge. So I think it's important that we start telling our stories. It's important that as Africans, we also project the positive sides of our continent, of our countries, of our communities, because there's a lot of positivity that's going on, but we let the media showcase the negativity.
Yes. Well, indeed, I couldn't have said it better. But one of the things that you didn't just talk about changing the narrative or try to depict a better picture of Lagos. You actually got your hands in the mud and tried to do something. In 2020, when most disadvantaged children were actually severely affected by the pandemic, you went ahead and created the very first virtual learning studio and classroom, which has gone on to actually help 1,000 students continue to learn. Can you talk to me about how you came up with that and how you managed to have it get implemented and become so successful?
Thank you, Isabel. So just to piggyback on the first question, I went into that community called Makoko, which was on the documentary. And when I got into the community, it was just a very resilient community. I saw lots of children, lots of young people who were living life as they had always known. Because, of course, not all communities must have the same standards, and not all cities must have the same standard of what we call development.
Yes.
But what was important was that those children had access to education. And I was working at the bank. I felt it was important to rally around, my friends and community, and we came together, and that was how Slum2school got birthed. We got 114 children into school in 2012, and today we have reached over 600,000 children through various interventions, including educational scholarships. And it's just been impactful and inspiring to see how the community, and the community of Africans for Africans, and that's not to say that we do not need to collaborate with our friends and our brothers across the world, but I think it's important that we do something to solve the problems that we have on our continent. And when the pandemic, when the pandemic struck in 2020,
yes,
we saw that the children who were most hit were primarily children from underserved communities who didn't have access to education. We know that the African population is going to double in 30 years. Data tells us that we're going to increase from 1.2 billion to 1.2 we're going to increase by 1.3 billion in 30 years.
Yes.
That's to about 2.5 billion, making us the largest continent and the most, the continent with the youngest population.
Yes.
1 in 3 young people across the world by 2030 will be Africans below the ages of 18. And so this means that we must invest in education. We must empower the future generations. We say Africa is the future, and in the real sense, it is. Because when you have 1 in 3 young people across the world being African youths, we must really take seriously the quality of education we deliver, the access to education, the infusion of technology.
Yes.
And when the pandemic struck, we felt it was important to bridge that gap. And so at Slum2school, we brought our teams together to say, how do we create opportunities for young Africans?
Yes.
Primarily, we were Nigerians, or were Nigerians. And so we built what became the first virtual learning classroom on the continent. We got young people across various communities learning remotely. And speaking about collaboration, we saw how lots of organizations came around to collaborate with us when they saw the success of that intervention. And Microsoft gave us 1 million licenses for free. Yes. UNICEF was so excited and said, how can we scale this from 1,000 to reach more learners across the continent? And so we scaled that project to over 500,000 children across Nigeria, and specifically across northern Nigeria. That has been very impactful. And what that has showed us is that we can actually get children learning in communities. We don't need to have classrooms only as a place for learning. We could use our communities and create cluster learning centers, community learning centers. We need to rethink the way we actually educate young people. We must not just enforce what we have inherited as a Western education. We need to find ways to be innovative as Africans. How are we telling our stories? How are we, sustaining our culture? Yes. How are we controlling the narrative? And how are we building the future of the continent where young people would have a voice and young people would take, the front seat?
Wow, very inspiring listening to you. But the thing for me that stood out is you did not first wait for all these partners to come on board and do all the big things before even all of that. And even after, you still continue to try and encourage those around you to get in there and do the little that they can. And one of those cases was when you're turning 30 a few years ago, when you decided to do something special around your birthday and you did the 30th dream. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Because I know you managed to raise funds and got about 300 children into schools with your friends. How did that impact you on a personal level, and what lessons did you derive from that, and how have they influenced the work you continue to do today?
Thank you so much for that question as well. I'm in Kigali, and I'm here as well because we just concluded the African Philanthropy Conference hosted by the African Philanthropy Forum. And many times we have been told that philanthropy is new to us as Africans, or philanthropy is a Western idea. And I think that's not true, because Africans by nature are givers. Africans by nature are kind people, are loving people. We have a community. And we grew up learning that it takes a village to raise a child.
That's
true. It takes a village to raise children. And I was raised not just by my mom and my dad, but by a community of aunties and uncles and well-wishers. You know, you walk into your aunt's office or your aunt's office and you know you're going home with some gifts. And that's the culture we have as Africans. And so, you know, Slum2school as an organization had been birthed and grown by that community. You know, in Africa we call it Ubuntu, right? And so it's important that we understand that philanthropy is not new to us as Africans. Philanthropy is who we are.
Yes.
And so on my 30th birthday, which was a few years ago, I felt, you know, what better way to celebrate such a great milestone than bringing together my friends to say, let's get more children into schools. And it was, you know, it was such an easy ask.
Yes.
You know, because we had not just 300 children getting into schools, we had over 3,000 children getting
3,000? Wow.
And so it's really inspiring seeing, you know, that as a community, in fact, as a continent, we need to be more united. We need to come together and find homegrown solutions to the problems that we have. I think we are filled with innovative, you know, young people who have incredible ideas, and it's important that we are very intentional about creating and charting the path for the future of the continent we want to see. We could be a continent that maximizes its human capital, and that's going to happen if we invest in the education of young people and maximize technology to bridge that gap.
Yes. Now our time is already fast spent, but before I leave you, there's so many young people who are listening to you right now and thinking, that sounds too good to be true. And it would be nice to get an understanding of what it actually takes, some of those tough moments that you've had to endure to be able to keep this work going, the challenges and the failures that have later on informed some of the decisions that you're making better today.
I could talk about 101 challenges, but one of the things I learned is that in life, you know, the challenges you have are building blocks to take you, you know, where you intend to go. One of the first challenges I encountered was trying to get my family and my friends to understand that it was important not just to complain, but to act. You know, as Isabel had mentioned, I was working in the bank, and going into those communities every other week and seeing that we had thousands of children who were just not in school. And these are children who have the potential to be any of the great innovators in the world. That bothered me so much. And I couldn't just find myself sitting in the bank and working and not doing anything. And so at some point, I had to quit my job. But that was not an easy decision to make. My friends, my family felt there was something fundamentally wrong. In Africa, you know, we say the witches have finally, you know, in Nigeria, we say the village people. But this was a reality, and I found it so difficult trying to convince them. But I'm so grateful for all the support that had come from friends, from families, from mentors, from elders, from the community. And that reminds me again about the spirit of Africans, you know, the philanthropic, you know, nature. It's in our DNA. And we rallied funds and got the first set of children enrolled in school. That was also not easy because it took us raising funds from individuals, because no corporate organization back then believed in the fact that young people could just come together and build a community to support children who were not in school and build schools and get learners and children in the classroom. But today we have grown to become one of the largest volunteer organizations on the continent. We've worked with thousands and tens of thousands of volunteers, hundreds of organizations from all the big Fortune 500 organizations. But that, again, is still a challenge, because what we think is our success is still a drop in the ocean. You know, we're just scratching the surface. If we're going to have an increase by over 110% in our young population, if we're going to have 1.3 billion young people or babies born in the next 3 decades, it means we must be intentional about educating the future. Yes. We must be intentional about providing solutions and acting, not just policies on paper, but implementing those policies to ensure that the future of Africa is not just dependent on international aid, but we can build opportunities to trade and attract the global community to work with us to build the future, to build Africa, to build what we call our home. And that's what I'll leave every young person out there with. Let's come together. Let's work together. this is our continent.
This is our
Begins with us.
continent, and it begins with us indeed. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I feel inspired, and I know somebody else has been inspired as well. Orondaam Otto, the founder, Slum2school Africa.